after the type 2 hypersensitivity, which we have studied last time, I need to teach you two more things, the type 3 and the type 4. So this is an example of the baby which was born of that disease. If you can recall the Rhesus disease, it is a disease because of the difference in the blood type of mother and the fetus. And we have learned a lot of things. Yesterday I was like browsing my lecture because for editing, you know, मुझे कितनी अजीब सी बात है, आप लोग बंदे को अपना लेक्चर सुनना पड़ता है बाद में कई मरतबा एडिट में. And I was वो जो काशिफ ने बोला था ना, because since it was like a ladies topic, like mom's topic, something like that, so I asked my wife to listen as well as that. So I mean, I wish these things help you to grow into a better person. So you can guess the baby, unfortunate baby, the mom's antibodies has almost destroyed the blood cells, and the baby is not able to survive after that. Okay, so there are some more things I would like to add in the type 2 hypersensitivity concept. There are certain more things I want to talk. That there are in type 2 hypersensitivity, we deal or we learn that how antibodies intermediate or trigger or create an hypersensitive reaction. So there are two examples where antibodies can trigger the immune reaction. Thank you very much, all of you guys, the online people. I'm not talking with you much when I was like in my physical classroom. Otherwise, you know, I used to browse the participants, I used to call their names and all these things. Sometimes I feel there are two ways. There are two ways that an antibody can intervene in signaling cascade. The one is you can consider as a stimulation or stimulating antibody. It's the first way of intervening the system. The other way is like the blocking antibody. So an antibody can interfere with the signaling cascade. Either they are stimulating or enhancing the function, or otherwise they can stop or block the function as well, depending on the nature of the antibody and the kind of receptor they able to bind. For example, this is a general example. This is a TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. So the thyroid stimulating hormone should bind to the receptor. Its receptor is named as thyroid stimulating hormone receptor. So if the thyroid stimulating hormone is there, it will going to bind with its receptor, and then you can see what happened. It will going to trigger. It will going to trigger the reaction. And thyroid stimulating hormone is going to affect the long lasting, you know, things on the growth and cell proliferation and all these things. And this is like the normal function. This is the normal function, or this is supposed to be the normal activity. But there is an antibody whose one side, you know, I told you that the antibody has two portions. The one of the portion is called as the FC portion, or that portion. This is a variable side of antibody. Remember, this is the variable part of antibody, because when antibodies are created, they create these variable portions in different ways. This is one of the way. For example, this is like another way. I'm just hypothetically writing things, so this is another way. So this portion is variable. The variable portion allows the antibodies to execute or bind with different things. Now think, because of the accident, that variable part of the antibody able to bind with the thyroid stimulating hormone receptor. We have thousands of antibodies in our body. Thousands more will be created during our lifespan. Or अगर हम unfortunate हो तो एक variable part of the antibody is somehow matched with the receptor. So that can trigger the thyroid stimulating hormone receptor, and that will going to affect the cell growth. So now in the absence of thyroid stimulating hormone, तो नहीं है, लेकिन कोई antibody start doing the function. So those people will start feeling or start having an overgrowth in the cells. And that is a disease, a very famous disease. I will go to show you that would call as the Graves disease. Okay, this disease as a result of the stimulation of the thyroid stimulating hormone The other option is that there is a possibility. Look at this example. Insulin is a hormone. It binds with the insulin receptor, and I can tell you, once an insulin binds with the insulin receptor, that is an indication. The presence of insulin in the system means that we have a lot of food. याद रखना, shortcut है. That means the cell will feel that I am full with energy and resources. देखो आपने सुना होगा कि बॉडी में ग्लूकोज का लेवल ज्यादा होता है तो इंसुलिन लेवल बढ़ता है. That means that if we have a lot of food, lot of carbohydrate, then the insulin comes into the play. So if the insulin is out there, that is an indication that the system is having a lot of resources. Once the insulin binds with the insulin receptor, that will going to trigger the survival pathway. That will going to trigger and push the cells to go for cell division. That will going to push the cells to proceed further for the cell division. That makes sense. Now there is an antibody which can bind itself. You know, once again you can see the variable part of antibody. Its chance it matches itself with the insulin receptor, one part of the insulin receptor, but in this way. So in that case, that antibody is going to block the insulin. ये insulin को block कर देंगी, that insulin might not be able to reach to the receptor. It will not going to stimulate because the binding is not in a way it should be. This is the perfect binding option which can stimulate. But unfortunately, that binding is not that perfect, but the presence of the antibody on the receptor will block the receptor for the function. So such cells will not going to respond against against the insulin. They will not going to respond to insulin because the receptors are blocked. So even if the cell is abundant with food, the cell will just feel that they are starving. They don't need to go for the cell division. They don't need to go for or trigger the survival mechanism. नहीं, इस यहाँ पे नहीं है. डायबिटीज का लिंक इंसुलिन के साथ है, इंसुलिन but that is one of the way that the cells choose not to respond to insulin. अब अगर हम ये समझे कि diabetes is about insulin, so that makes sense. But diabetes is not only about insulin. Okay, it's like it has more dimensions. But that makes sense कि एक cell है वो insulin को respond नहीं कर रहा ना, just because of the blocking of the receptor by XYZ antibody. You can ask me, sir, कि बाकी सारे receptors भी तो होंगे ना cells में. There will be a lot of receptors out there for so many different reasons. तो उनके साथ क्या होएगी? So whether they will be blocked as well, the answer is yes. The likelihood is there because you are creating a lot of antibodies, and maybe one of the antibody just matches with any XYZ receptor, and that can trigger a push and block the receptor as well. So this thing is possible. So this is one of the disease in which the stimulation or blockage, the concept of stimulation and blocking is there. This is called Myasthenia gravis. मैं पहले आपको एक और डिजीज दिखा दूं, ग्रेव्स डिजीज. ये आपको ज्यादा आसानी से समझ आ जाएगी. The person's thyroid is expanded, and that makes sense because of the overstimulation, and that overstimulation is because of certain XYZ antibody. The antibody start binding itself to the receptor and then keep triggering the cells. Okay, let's see. This is another, the blocking situation. The other example. You know, the nerves communicate with each other at the juncture of the nerves when they join with each other. They're present. वहां पर होता है a little small gap, and you know what that gap is called? That gap is called as synapse. सुना होगा आपने, that gap is called as. Once the nerve impulse reaches to its terminal position, मैं यहाँ पर draw करता हूँ, गड़बड़ ना हो जाए. Once the nerve impulse reaches to its, this is the ending of the one nerve or neuron. This is the start of another neuron or a receptor. Once the nerve impulse reaches to the very much end of the neuron, it triggers and releases certain chemicals. It releases certain chemicals. Those chemicals pass on that minute gap, and those chemicals are received by some receptors on the other side, on the other cell. So the other cells will going to receive those chemicals, and those chemicals are called as neurotransmitters. They are called as neurotransmitters. One of the neurotransmitter is acetylcholine. One of the neurotransmitter is acetylcholine. So once the nerve impulse reaches to the very much to the terminal, what happens? It releases acetylcholine. Acetylcholine diffuses that portion and received by the receptor on the other side. The receptor captures the acetylcholine. You know what happens out? It's interesting. It actually capture and take it to the cell. Usko internalize karne ka. But this is not the objective of the class, but just it's a very interesting thing. You can Google it. A receptor captures the insulin and then internalize it and take it to the muscles, and then the muscle will start doing the job. अब नर्व से मैसेज आ रहा है, फॉर एग्जांपल कि आपने पलके छपकानी है ऐसे है ना. So the message will like come through the nerve, the neuron, and that neuron, at the end of the neuron, it passes to the acetylcholine, received by the receptor on the other cells, and then taken it to the muscles. And the muscle will respond. हाथ कैसे मूव करने हैं, आंखें कैसे मूव करनी है, बॉडी कैसे मूव करनी है. That is how it works. So if there is an antibody, now look at that. Now, if there is an antibody called, now this is the anti-acetylcholine. If an anti-acetylcholine is present in the body, out of nowhere, out of somewhere, that acetylcholine will going to block those receptors. That will not allow those acetylcholine to bind with the receptors. If the receptors are blocked, they will not going to be internalized. If they will not going to be internalized, the message will not going to be transported to the effector muscles. The message will not going to reach to the people which will going to respond. So in that situation, what will happen? The brain is telling the muscles to move, but that message will not going to be completely forwarded to the target place. Such people will not going to respond to a certain neuronal signals. So in this case, these people have difficulty in opening their eyes, and I mean they will like they find it difficult to use their facial muscles or eyes, and because the brain is telling them, but because of the presence of certain antibodies in that place, the nerves or the neurons will fail to forward that message to the next cells. Achha, such things also occur in different cases. आपने सुना होगा कि जब सांप जी नहीं वो और बात होती है. स्लीपिंग में एक और चीज होती है, स्लीपिंग पैरालिसिस. उसके बारे में हम बात कर सकते हैं, लेकिन वो भी ये नहीं होती है, लेकिन वो उससे somehow रिलेटेड है. तो बड़ी पता नहीं आप लोगों, आप रोटी खाया कर फिर अगर फिर नहीं. That's the first thing I can tell you. अच्छे से खाना खाया करो. Sleep paralysis is quite I mean scary. तो लोगों को वो तो पुराने जमाना होता था, लोगों ने कुड़ी पे जीना आ गए. I mean she was like talking in this way, but that was the actual disease. And disease suning, I think that was a situation that arises because of certain abnormalities at that time, and that you fail to move yourself. लगता है जैसे चेस्ट के ऊपर पत्थर रख दिया किसी ने ना. Pushing. You can't move your hand to push that person. Yeah, I understand. मैं बोलता है जैसे रॉक रख दिया, किसी ने पत्थर रख दिया आपके सीने के ऊपर, and you are trying to away and you can't move your hands. And sometimes people scream at that time. होता है ना, try to scream and they fail to speak as well. But I suggest, the first thing is that because since you will going to be adults, you are adults, sorry. सही से आप लगाया. somebody करवट पे सोए तो sleep paralysis नहीं होता. असल में actually it depends on a lot of factors. One of the factors is that your body might not have that much energy at that time to deal with that thing. वो उसकी interpretation नहीं कर पाते. लेकिन याद रखें कि अगर आप ऐसे individual को अकेले नहीं सोना चाहिए. The first thing is that until unless he is like feeling comfortable with most of the time. और जो लोग पास है ना, उनको उसको जबरदस्ती उठाना चाहिए at that. Ask other people कि जो खुदा खासा स्लीप पैरालिसिस एक्सपीरियंस कर रहे हैं फ्रीक्वेंटली. कभी कभी होता है, वो सबके साथ ही कभी ना कभी हो जाता है. ख्वाब में हो जाता है, जैसे ऐसे लगता है ख्वाब आया. बट इफ समबडी इज एक्सपीरियंसिंग फ्रीक्वेंटली, सो ऐसी सिचुएशन में द फर्स्ट थिंग यू नीड टू डू इज टू बंदे को झंझोड़ के यू नीड टू वेक दैट पर्सन अप एट दैट टाइम. फौरी तौर पर उसको उठाना चाहिए ताकि वो प्रॉपर नर्व्स अपने ब्रेन कॉन्शियस में आके अपने मस्कुलर एक्टिविटीज के ऊपर जो है वो काबू पा ले फौरी तौर पर. So सांप के काटे में आपने सुना होगा कि जब सांप काटता है तो लोग जो है खुदा ना खाते, इससे वो फौत हो जाते हैं। तो बंदा सोचता है यार सांप ने काटा है, छोटा सा केमिकल बॉडी के अंदर गया है, एंड इवेंचुअली दैट स्मॉल केमिकल हाउ इट इज एबल टू किल द बिग पर्सन ऑल टुगेदर। सो जो स्नेक के वेनम्स होते हैं, मोस्ट ऑफ द स्नेक वेनम्स, वेनम, आई मीन वेनम की उर्दू क्या होती है? जहर होती है ना। Snakes are wonderful topic, by the way. How snakes are able to influence that much. So snakes can affect the prey. वो अलग अलग तरीकों से नुकसान पहुंचाते. They can kill the people, especially the snakes who are venomous. Not every snake is venomous. Most of them are not venomous. And the ones who are venomous, they are not supposed. I'm not talking about the snakes which you are. Most of the snakes are not venomous, but the snakes, some of them are, and the ones animal snakes की बात करो. Some of the snakes who are actually venomous, even they are not supposed to use their venom to kill the people. It's a very precious commodity for the venom for the snakes. वो बहुत मेहनत से बनाते हैं इसका. It's a toxin. It's a bad thing. So even they can kill themselves with the venom. So they created separately, kept it at a separate chamber, and they released it through an alternate way. They release it through the channels. Those channels ended up in the teeth, and from the teeth they actually release those venoms. Of course, they are creating that venom in their own body, so they are somehow immune. They're immune against, but it's not that much immune if the amount is too much. If the snake venom enter into our body, our body might be able to deal with it if the amount is not enough. But if it is like a reasonable amount and the snake bite is at a very important place, I will show you how then it can kill the person. But how it can kill the person? There are many ways. One of the way is called as, some of the snake venoms are neurotoxins. Some of them are, she's very lucky. Some of them are producing neurotoxins. Not everyone is producing neurotoxins. Some of them are producing neurotoxins. I will going to catch you guys, okay? Explain snakes se marte kaise hain, okay? Then the next session.